Okay then, I am Miranda Huntington. I am in my 3rd semester at Ball State, and I am from Bloomington, Illinois.
I am Catherine McLean, and I'm in my 3rd semester as well, and I'm from Kansas City, Missouri.
And I am Jenny Pinella, and I am in my 4th semester at Ball State, and I am from Athens, Alabama.
And my name is Catherine Dry. This is my BSU, and I am from Evansville, Indiana.
My name is Jade Hall, and I am a 3rd semester at BSU, and I am from Valparaiso, Indiana.
All right, so we will begin the Big Steps Team Behavior Change Project by all of us. So some supporting literature that we looked at are actually articles that come from within the original study. One is How Many Steps Per Day Are Enough? And that reviewed existing child and adolescent step-defined physical activity literature and what average steps to expect from boys and girls per day. So that had a lot of CDC information as far as statistics about obesity rates and the average physical activity that children and adolescents should be engaging in per day. And then we also looked at the effect of outdoor activity, which this study was to assess the effect of outdoor activity on the physical activity level of children. And this found that fixed playground equipment produced the most moderate to vigorous activity amongst children, which I think led to part of the methods for the original study, which was like a more open area with some equipment for that recess. And our original study is evaluating public posting, goal setting, and rewards to increase physical activity during recess. It evaluated a pedometer-based intervention between 2 teams, and it used self-monitoring and feedback as reinforcement components to increase physical activity during recess. And the CDC recommends that children engage in 60 minutes of physical activity daily. And based on previous studies, elementary-aged girls can reach this by engaging in 11,000 to 12,000 steps a day. Boys were a little bit more, but since we have all females in this group, I focused on the elementary-aged girls.
So the purpose of our particular study was to evaluate the effectiveness of interventions using pedometers and feedback to increase physical activity. So the ends were public postings via a Google Hangout group chat that we have on our phones and competition between 2 teams.
The methods that we used, each team member wore pedometers that they purchased and wore on their hips. The pedometers were reset to 0 each time before the beginning of each session, and each team member recorded the number of their steps for each session each day. At the end of each session, the information was recorded to a Google Sheet shared by throughout the group, and IOA data was calculated daily. And during the feedback phases, the data was recorded on the Google Sheet as well. Once the data was calculated through steps and rate, then it was determined between the blue team and the green team who the winner was by who had the highest daily steps and highest rate. Our participants' settings and materials, the blue team was Catherine Dry, Catherine McLean, and Jenny Pinella, and then the green team was Jade Hall and Miranda Henson. And our settings could be any combination of the or mixtures of the following. It could be outdoor, large open areas, which could be like track and field, court, any kind of courts, fixed equipments, like treadmills, punching bags, ellipticals, any outdoor toys, jump ropes, hula hoops, playing basketball, any other kind of, sports like that. The materials that were used were the pedometer, and it was to record the number of steps that was taken within a time period of 13 to 34 minutes of daily sessions, as was used in the study, and then were recorded on the Google Sheets, and we used bar graphs and line graphs to show the data across the phases.
Behavior that we were measuring were steps during physical activity, and the operational definition is both feet ground with a foot lifted in any direction and making contact with the ground again. An example would include feet across the ground, and would be picking up both feet and making contact with the ground again simultaneously. The data collection, we went with individual data and group data. The original study, what we did was we recorded for our individual data, we recorded total steps and divided by the total duration to calculate taken by each individual daily. And the group data included adding each total steps divided by total minutes of physical activity per participant to calculate average rate of steps taken by all the participants daily. The design is a multiple treatment reversal design. The original study had 2 experiments. We decided to go with experiment 1, which included one where we covered our pedometers, and we would just see where we were at with our steps initially without added, and then back they continue to cover our pedometers, and it becomes a competition. So seeing, okay, well, can I increase my steps? I see that our team is losing, so perhaps this time steps, then I can increase the step total. And then there's the feedback phase with monitoring, and that includes where you can take off the tape and monitor your steps during physical activity to try to get ahead in the competition. And then the next part of that would be the reversal, where we go back to baseline, and then there's the return to feedback with self-monitoring phase. In our project so far, we've done the feedback phase. For our IOA, we do pedometer pictures each day, and so we take a picture with our phones, and then we add it to our just to show that this is the steps that we took that day. And then our calculations are total count IOA, where the smaller number is over the larger number times 100. And we 3 things that we calculate. The first thing is the daily individual. So we're seeing, okay, does the pedometer match the data that everyone added into the Google Sheet? The second thing is the daily team step count, and add all of the team steps together. And then the third thing is daily average team steps. So we wanted to see so we take the total team steps and divide the number of by team members, and then we add the total number of teams minutes, divide that by the number of team members, and then we divide the average steps by the average minutes, and that's how we get that third number. An IOA agreement must be agreed upon with all 3 IOA components. And so for our IOA, the first day had 83% IOA, and then 100%, 100%, and then 83%. So here's how we did that in our IOA example, which is on the next slide. Yeah. And then treatment integrity. We used visual analysis of graph data, and that was with our line graphs. Also, photos of the actual readings from the pedometer for validation. And we used the same method of data collection and recording across all of our phases. And also, we used this treatment fidelity checklist, which Jenny made on the next slide. Yeah, there we go. And basically, we follow these steps to make sure that we're all doing it the same way each day that we do physical activity.
Sorry, guys, I muted myself. Okay, so our results. During baseline, you can see that the green team averaged 105.7 steps per minute, with Jade averaging 112.1 and Miranda averaging 100. The blue team averaged 100.8 steps per minute, with Catherine M averaging 61.1, Catherine D averaging 147.1, and Jenny averaging 94.1 steps per minute. And as a total group, our average during baseline was 102.7 steps per minute. And you can see the green team's baseline graphs on this slide, and then the blue team's baseline graphs on this slide. In the feedback phase, the green team averaged 109.5 steps per minute, with Jade averaging 110.4 and Miranda averaging 108.6. The blue team had an average of 108 per minute, with Catherine M averaging 75.6, Catherine D averaging 152.4, and Jenny averaging 96.8 steps per minute. Our group average for the feedback phase is 108.9 steps per minute. And again, here are the green team graphs, including baseline and the beginning of our feedback phase. And here are the blue team's graphs. So each day, when we posted our results within the Google chat, we also posted bar graphs in our Google Doc that is shared with each other. So you can see the bar graph at the end of our feedback phase, and the table that we use to make the graph. So 3 days of this week, the green team had in that day, and the other 2 days the blue team won. And then this is the improvement from the baseline to feedback phase. So the green team's baseline was an average of 105.7 steps per minute, and the feedback phase average was 109.5 steps per minute. So that was an average improvement of 3.6%. The blue team had an average during baseline of 100.8 steps per minute, and in feedback the average was 108.3 steps per minute, so their average improvement was 10.1%. As a group, our average improvement was 6.85% from baseline to feedback. And then we're each going to talk about our individual results.
All right, so in discussion about my individual results, I'm going to show this table, and then there's going to be a graph. So the file shows the session number, the number of steps, the duration of activity, the rates and steps per minute, and what phase. So I had a total of 9 sessions for baseline, and have been able to complete about 5 sessions for the feedback phase. My average steps are at 1,983, and my range rate, because we focus a lot on range, is 63.8 to 176.6. So I've got a wider range. So now I'm going to show you the graph. So this shows the rate of daily exercise. So we've got our sessions and then steps per minute. So during the baseline phase, I had a 2-day period during the week when we were all doing our physical activity where I was injured in one of my personal training sessions that I have from doing lateral movements. So those 2 sessions were made up on the other 2 following days. So if you see there's a spot where I was injured. And then you can see, so the baseline was considered unstable until about 10:22, and then it started to kind of become more stable. And then we entered the feedback phase on 10:29.
Okay, so my individual results, you can see my table here. My average steps per session was 1,976.3, and I averaged about 20 minutes per session, and that made my average rate of steps per minute 102.9 steps per minute. My range was from 88 to 135 steps per minute, so I had a decent range there too. But as you can see, if you look in the rate column, that I had a study period here, and we'll be able to see that more on my graph. So my first 5 days of baseline were not super stable, a decreasing trend. My first day I started really hard and I was really excited about doing it, and after that I fell off a bit. But as you can see in sessions 6 through 10, my data grew very stable just prior to the feedback stage. And then sessions 11 through 15, the feedback phase, my data has been relatively stable. Session 11, we can see that was the first day of the feedback phase, and we had not gotten feedback prior to that day. So then after that day, when we got our first feedback, I was then able to increase my steps in sessions 12 through 15. What about you, Catherine?
So my individual results, I think, are quite varied from the others. Mine's pretty significantly lower, but my range of steps does vary from 696 to 2,541, which is quite a bit of a range, giving me a range of rate of 46 to 100. I did have all 10 days of the baseline phase and all 5 days of the first week of feedback. As you can see on my graph, I have quite the variability at the beginning of baseline, and I become stable the second half of baseline, and my feedback thus far is pretty varied, which actually reflects the results of the original study. That's what they found as well, was that it was pretty varied. So we'll see what happens in the next phases.
With my table, the same information, my average steps were 2,375.8, range of steps 3,594, average duration was about 16 minutes, and the range of duration was 26 to 13, and then it was 148.9, and then range of rate was 179 to 130. And in my graph, you can see in baseline it started out pretty varied, and then it had a downward trend. Then feedback started; it kind of went up a little bit, but well, and then it kind of went down on that last point. For me, I think a big part of feedback, it's maybe feedback alone is not completely effective for me, but I think a big thing is that the time of day that I post, because I work out in the mornings and sometimes the feedback isn't given until midday. So for me, sometimes I'm getting the effect that I've already worked out for the next day, for the next part of the competition. So, and then there are also some other variables to go with my graph. I sprained my ankle, and that kind of made my results go down. And then also I ended up having to change I was playing soccer and kicking the soccer ball, and then I sprained my ankle, and then I went to walking because that was safer. And then once feedback phase started, my ankle started getting better, so I started to jog, and now I'm back to soccer. So I think a big part of that has to do with what activity is chosen. But as you can see on my graph, there's no significant change from baseline. And but one thing that I've noticed is just that compared to the beginning of this, or prior to this study starting, I didn't work out at all. So for me, I am still benefiting as far as steps go. But I've enjoyed the study, and I'm excited to see what happens in the next phase.
With my results, my baseline's pretty much level. My interesting results are my feedback, because I started out pretty high and then it dropped because I did real well with my first day of my feedback. My baseline stayed stable throughout the period, and then the second day of my feedback, I have chronic migraines, and so the second and third day of my feedback, I had severe migraines, and so I was kind of out of it. So my steps dropped. Still did them, just didn't have as much rate. But then the fourth day, I got probably the highest amount of step because that was also a day that I worked with the special needs kids that I work with at the football game, and we had to go up and down the steps at the football game many, many times. So going up and down those steps, I got plenty of my steps. So I think I made up for the 2 days that I didn't have steps. And so I think I'm more interested with the range of steps that I've been getting, and the range of rate from 75 to 113. I'll be interested. I'll have to really push myself this next phase because football season is over and I don't have those days that I'm going to be getting out with those kids. So now I have to make myself get out by myself. So my period of time with them is over, and so I have to find a different motivation to get out and walk since I won't be going out with those kids anymore. And so I think that's one of the things with the behavior part, finding a different motivation when something else gets taken away, and as well as, you know, having the chronic migraines of what may pull you back and what may push you forward, and getting past those different barriers. So
in this slide, you can see the group graph. It depicts the baseline and feedback phases. So we just took the average of everyone's rate each day, and that's how we developed this table and graph. So as you can see, our baseline was fairly stable. We had a day or two of higher rates in there, but overall a very stable trend in baseline. And then in the feedback phase thus far, it's also fairly stable. The initial 2 days were lower than the last 3 days, but overall another very stable trend. And also, as you can see in this graph, there isn't a huge, as a whole group, from baseline to feedback, not a ton of difference at all. The range for feedback and the range for baseline are fairly similar, with one lower value in the baseline phase. But overall, as a group, we did not improve much in the feedback phase with feedback alone as an intervention. So we concluded as a group that our group improvement was only 6.85%. And so we feel as a group that feedback alone was not enough to make a significant change in our daily step rate. However, there were individuals who saw larger improvements with the feedback. Like myself, I feel as though I improved a bit more than some others from baseline to feedback. But overall, as a whole group, we didn't feel that feedback alone to make a huge difference in our daily step rate.
There are some limitations that we need to know on this project. Probably the largest one is time. So the participants, we all work full-time jobs, and found it difficult to take time to exercise between 15 and 20 something minutes per day, Monday through Friday, as well as check and post our results daily. Also, we had personal life circumstances that got in the way of making the exercise consistent or having steady data, and also events that made it difficult for some days for some people to make timely postings of their results. Also, communication is always a barrier when you're having communication over the internet versus in person. So that's a barrier in and of itself. Also, another limitation is technology reliability. So for myself, my pedometer broke, and I had to go get a new one. Through this study, I'm technically not using the same pedometer that I used in baseline. And, the pedometer falling off clothing is another limitation as well. We also all had different brands of pedometers. We used different facilities, different accesses to equipment, and we also worked out at different times of the day. So in relation to what Catherine was saying earlier, she works out in the morning, so that's going to, and I myself also work out in the morning, so that puts a limitation on what our results are going to look like, because we don't get the feedback until probably earlier hours of the morning. Also, the original study was conducted on children, and we are all adults. So that's definitely a limitation. I would have to say for myself and my experience with this project, probably my greatest limitation is that I work with a personal trainer most days of the week, throughout the week. So my exercise is very regulated. So some days, working out for a long period of time and working out very hard, I might not be taking steps. I might be lifting weights. We might not be allowed to do cardio that day. So those are some factors that have fluctuated data that I have presented so far.
Okay. How are we doing on time?
We're at 33 minutes.
Okay. So let me just mention some limitations so that it's going to be helpful for the other groups also to think about these things. And then I have more specific questions in terms of study, then maybe we can do that off air. So when you're discussing limitations, a lot of things that your group listed, first of all, I mean, it's a lot of stuff. It's a complex study you chose, and clear. I mean, it's clear that you're all with different schedules and different everything. So it's going to be a problem for everybody for across the country to get this stuff done. So I mean, hats off, you pulled it off. Ongoing that you're still going to keep taking data. So the limitation that you listed are really what you're talking about is the feasibility of it for your group. It's not really limit. So when you're talking about limitations, you want to think about what are limits to your results. What are the things that limit how good or bad or how much can I make out of your results? So the different pedometers, the communication thing isn't a problem unless it posed as a problem in the way your behavior turned out. So the sprained ankle and the 2 foot, the injury thing and the migraine, those are limitations that they impacted your results. The communication is only like you didn't have a great time because you're like different, whatever. It wasn't easy for you. So it's not technically limitation. What is a limitation is that it's a class project. You know what you're doing. You're not blind to the study. You all know the reason you have to. So you're first of all just like, I'm gonna find a study, do it. So your intrinsic motivation, like for Jenny, she said, I'm gonna have to find something else. But the point is, we want to see if these treatment plans work for you or not. It isn't for you to find something else that should work. And that's the limitation, that these feedback in itself is not a reinforcement for you 5 people. It's something that didn't really work across the board. And so that's the limitation, that doesn't have the same value to each one of you. And that you faced a couple of those abolishing operations, which is the personal, the health issues. Then you want to talk about that you're biased. You're all biased. You're all motivated to do well. So forget the feedback. You have reasons to do well because it's a class project. There's a bias going in. There's a reactivity going in because you're all the experimenters and you're also all the participants, which has never really worked for a study. In all studies, you've got the experimenters doing things behind the scene, and then 10 the participants today, we're going to do this. So there was no surprise element. You all knew what's come, take your data, graph it, look at it, make decisions. Okay, tomorrow I'll do it. So there's no so there's a reactivity of it, and then you're biased. Another thing is that you're limited with time. You got to wrap this up within a certain time frame, and you've had a really extended baseline, which we'll discuss later as to what you could have done differently. So that you have now still 4 more weeks. It's due on the 6th December, the report. So you're probably going to get to your next phase several more days before, by the first week of December, you'll still keep taking data. But you have to wrap it up still, even though you have about 4 more weeks. Well, not 4, what's today? right? You have about 3.5 weeks more to continue with this study, but that's it. It can't go beyond that. So you're forced to wrap up this thing within a time frame, and you don't have the freedom to just keep going and exploring and adding more components to your treatment that you would have in real life, because this is a class project. Then I want to also mention that your IOA, because it's for a class project, because you just had to true IOA. So your data collection system is entirely contingent upon how good or bad your pedometers were. And it's fine that because if Jenny, Jade, did you use a different pedometer for baseline versus treatment? Yes. So that is a problem. Yes, so that is a problem, because your values aren't technically comparable, because so you use this machine to weigh this. You know how they say when you're trying for weight loss, you got to have the same weighing machine, because they all have their own different error system. So in Jade's case, it's a limitation that her instrument was switched within the study. But the fact that you all have different is fine, as long as it's the same pedometer used for each one of you. Now, the activities being different, that is also not ideal. But if you one day are doing soccer and the next day you're just going for a walk, and the next day you're going for a swim, or the next day you're doing weights or whatever, that variation within the participant itself is a problem. But if that kind of variation was also the same kind of variation versus same kind of variation in treatment, and then that can be assuaged. We can say, well, it was the same kind of variability during baseline versus treatment, so the participant did not do anything different. The whole point of all this is to say, did the participant do anything differently baseline versus treatment besides the treatment? So if she got new shoes during treatment phase and suddenly she's walking fabulous, that's a problem, because I don't know if it's feedback or her new shoes are so much more comfortable and well supported and helps with her foot ache that she's walking more now. So that would be a limitation to me being confident that it is the treatment that has helped me versus it is some other random stuff that has affected my thing. So why don't we close the recording now and but continue talking.
Okay.